and now we move forward without any break to the next session of today, which is the technical solutions and inspirations. And here we have a special guest star, not in the program until very late this last evening. So we are extending this session a little bit just to make sure that we get everyone have time to speak. So we have Christina Adams, who is the Senior Manager of Digital Accessibility at Site Improve. And then we have Sandra Velarde Gonzalez, who is the Head of Accessibility at ETNIC, which is the public body supporting public services in Belgium with accessibility. Then we have Breixo Pastoriza, who is the co-founder and director of accessibility at Glocal Quality Solutions, and he will talk about the digital decade that we are moving into. And then we finish this off with Hector Minto, who will talk about GenAI and other cool things. So let's kick this off with Christina. Welcome, good to see you here, and good morning, I should say, because I know it's early for you, but thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. Hi everybody, so I'm Christina Adams from Site Improve. I'm just gonna talk very briefly about kind of agentic AI. It's the hot topic, of course, of everything right now, but I really want to talk about how that might influence our trajectory in digital accessibility and see where we can go with it in all reality. So we can move on to the next one there. Perfect. So some of the current challenges that we have and have always had in digital accessibility world is the volume of remediation, right? So how can AI maybe help us with this is increasing that testing coverage. Of course, I'm sure that's been talked about today. I did not join at my 2 a.m. For this the beginning of this session today, but I'm sure this has come up, right? We can increase that testing coverage to make it easier for your teams to prioritize issues. We can anticipate some user needs with that based on disability type. There's just a lot of things we can do to kind of help us with the sheer volume, right? The second area here of kind of common challenges that we're always struggling with is that new content creation piece as well. Because yes, we have legacy debt to work on. We also have new content that has to be created in an accessible way for people with disabilities, right? So I'm sure Wilco talked about it, but in time recommendations, right? Meeting people where they are in their creation process to give people that information of how to make something accessible, or that they are maybe making poor choices in that moment. Next challenge that I often hear too is that resource and knowledge limitation. Our digital accessibility experts are few and far between. We're still growing the field, right? People who actually know the ins and outs of what we are meant to do to make things accessible, how we meet user needs is something that's kind of a rare skill out there, right? So how do we enable folks who are less knowledgeable of this field? How do we enable them to educate themselves, right? To have conversations with an interface that has a larger database of knowledge to work with? How can they ask questions and actually interrogate what they're doing in order to build things in an accessible way? So that's kind of where we see AI playing a big role here. Like today, it's starting, and we will only see these grow over time. But these are kind of task-oriented pieces for specifically enabling people and processes, right? This is addressing our current challenges today, and this is where we're seeing things move. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. But we really do want to look a little bit beyond that, right? So how does this compliance talk track that we all have been on for a very long time, making accessible content, of course, has benefits to people. That's the whole reason that legislation and regulation exists for us today in this field. So how does that compliance actually benefit the business itself? How do we convince people that it is a good idea, not only for people, but for their business to do this type of work? And that's where we really need to use this AI-driven trajectory we're on to combine that compliance and the business performance side of things. So how do we pull those two things together and use AI to enable this sort of larger conversation of building accessibility deep into our business practices, not just a layer on top of it. And that's really where I think the innovation side of this AI movement we are seeing, it really comes into play. So these two things, the compliance and the performance, they work better, exponentially better when they are together, when they're talked about and actioned on together. And then the next slide, and I'm trying to be mindful of time here, but that's where we really see these AI agents, right? So these agents are really task-driven, goal-oriented AI pieces of the puzzle, right? So we have our accessibility agent working with our analytics agent to tell us what we should prioritize, what our users are actually using, so we can go and make those decisions. We can interrogate those agents and have them collaborate and work together to actually dictate where we spend our money and valuable resources, right? Because we want to enable the experts in your organizations to be able to do those things, right? We don't want to replace them with AI. We want them to be more impactful across the entire organization. And we know that accessibility work already influences search, right? It already influences how our content is found and what our content strategy may be when we create new content and experiences. But getting these AI agents to collect those disparate data sets that are out there today across our business and really amplify the work of our digital accessibility team and experts is what we want to move towards. So we can pull in those data sets, make good choices, and inevitably make accessibility a layer within the larger strategy of an organization. It can't function. We all know this. I'm preaching the choir a little bit here, but it can't function as an additional task, right? So using these AI agents to really build it into the core of the business and make it a measurable result is really where I see AI taking this and running with it, and making your kind of limited resources of experts so much more impactful to a larger business. And that's the thing I get excited about whenever I talk about this sort of AI movement and process. It's not to replace, it's really to enhance, right? We have limited resources. Let's use AI to push those resources further and deeper into what we're doing and creating. So that's all I had. That was the very quick version. I appreciate the opportunity, though, to deliver that.
Thank you very much, Christina. It was very, very clear and good. I was a bit depressed when you say that we live in an AI-driven world with infinite content. I go, oh my God,
I know.
But in general, very positive. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Gives a little bit of anxiety, but yes, yeah. not intentional.
So, and now we move into the more, I don't know, human part of this maybe. So Sandra Velarde Gonzalez is going to talk to us about the drivers for better accessibility in a public organization. So I have your slides prepared here.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for the invitation. Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to share with you some tips in order to help you to stay motivated when trying to implement digital accessibility in a public organization. Next slide, please. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Sandra, and I work in a public organization responsible for monitoring accessibility in accordance with the EU directive. As you probably know, Belgium is a multilingual country with 3 official languages, Dutch, French, and German. My organization called ETNIC operates within the French-speaking community, supporting key sectors such as education, culture, sports, and more, and we employ about 400 IT specialists. Next slide, please. So my first motivation is to make websites accessible. So how do we do that? Next slide. We started with training everyone involved and made the trainings mandatory. So we trained everyone in the organization from CEO to account services. And then we also keep in touch with our developers with monthly workshops. So after the theoretical workshop of, let's say, 15 minutes, there is a quiz with a reward, a pack of chocolate or sweets for the winner. And actually, it really works. Developers come to the workshops because they are gamers. Sorry for the cliche. Next slide, please. What also helps to make websites accessible is, for example, to develop a 4-year digital accessibility plan. 3 years ago, I suggested my organization to make 10 websites and an app accessible a year. The first reaction from everybody was, what? That's impossible. We will make it. I insisted with diplomacy, and it actually worked. We made 10 websites accessible. And this year, the demand was so high that we had to turn away some webmasters for the final plan. So this plan, of course, needs to be approved by top managers. You have to request budget, staffing, and also accessibility ambassadors in different departments because you can't do it all alone. And you have to celebrate each achievement. Next slide. It was already said before, but another important thing is to include accessibility requirement in vendor contracts because, oh, sorry, we forgot to make it accessible, or yes, sure, we checked color contrasts, is not a valid answer. Next slide, please. The second tip I want to share with you is to collaborate with people with disabilities. Next slide. An advice would be don't try to face the mountain of accessibility alone. You really need to convince your organization that you need a team. And then in your team, hire people with disabilities. Why? Because it makes accessibility concrete and it makes you go beyond web accessibility standards. And it also helps you to do actual user testing. Next slide. I would also suggest to empower people with disabilities. For example, our colleague who's blind teaches other colleagues in the organization how to use assistive technologies like NVDA, VoiceOver, Talkback, Siri, and so on. And it's kind of obvious, but it's important to center their voices in accessibility efforts. Imagine a group of men deciding what feminism should be. It would be kind of weird, isn't it? So let's not do that with people with disabilities. Next slide. And the last motivating tip for me, I wanted to share with you is what I would call the aha moment. Next slide. It's when you see the light in someone's eyes when they eventually understand accessibility. And how do you get that? You get that by showing people accessibility issues. It has a real world impact. Let me tell you about a situation we experienced last year. 2 blind colleagues showed an external developer how inaccessible his product was. He bravely did a blindfold test, struggled for 10 minutes, and finally declared, oh, this is not acceptable, it should talk properly to me. And we all agreed with him, and now the product is being made accessible. This approach was confirmed by an inspiring conference we attended at Paris Web 2024. It was a Leni Fingal conference, Be a Dolphin, Not a Shark, that could be translated by Cooperation Beats Confrontation. Next slide. As a conclusion, I would say that accessibility, as you know, is not about technical challenges. It's about building a culture where inclusion is not an afterthought, but a shared responsibility. Next slide. And what can be helpful? Build a team, especially with people who live the experience of disability. Start with training and planning, but don't stop there. Show, don't tell. Be a dolphin, not a shark. It works better. And celebrate progress, no matter how small. And of course, stay motivated. Thank you for your attention. That's it for me. Susanna.
Thank you very much, Sandra. That was very helpful, I think. And I like the don't make conflicts out of everything. And I think was something we all can learn from. And with a combination of good tools and this more of an organizational motivation, I think that is really helpful for everyone as a tip for moving forward. So now we will go on to the next speaker, moving a little bit more to the policy side of this. So Breixo Pastoriza is going to talk to us about the digital decade of 2030. So how do we make sure that the digital decade becomes a digital decade for all citizens?
Well, I cannot turn on my video, Susana. It says that it has been disabled. So I don't know if you guys can enable my video. Oh, okay.
I can only ask you to enable it yourself. So now I see you. Yeah.
Great. That's great. Well, yes, I want to talk about 2030. That is our digital decade. Is like our share vision for a human-centric and sustainable digital Europe. And our digital decade talks about 100% of key public services that should be available online for every citizen. And we already have a very nice legal foundation that we're celebrating today. That is the WAD that requires all public sector websites and apps to be accessible to everyone. But to really make it work, we need to make fundamental changes about how we build our digital world. And I want to talk about two practical things that I think are fundamental to get us there. The first one is the shift left. That means that accessibility moves from a last minute compliance requirement check to a conversation that we are having at the beginning of the planning phase. So that means we're not fixing accessibility, we're actually building with accessibility. And why is this really important? Well, it's really important because if you don't shift left, it's going to be really tough to comply with the technical requirements and the goals of the WAD. And this is because most of the components that we use, we are not building if we don't build them with accessibility, it's not going to be easy to fix them. And if we fix them, then it means that they're gonna lose their accessibility when there's a new update that is coming. So in Spain, we try to address this. I'm watching this shift of mentality in regarding to shift left in procurement contracts, where we are asking suppliers to have an accessibility team, a roadmap for accessibility, where they start building with accessibility from the design and on, and stating that the final product is going to be audited by an independent entity before releasing the final payment. So that enforces these suppliers to engage with shift left design. Also, it has another benefits that is cost saving. We talked a lot about this, and there's a lot of studies that says that detecting a problem in design phase instead of production is 100 times cheaper. I mean, if we don't use shift left and we attack this issue in the design phase, it's going to be 100 times higher the cost. The other thing I wanted to talk about is co-creation. Co-creation means not designing for people with disabilities, but designing with them. And this is very important. And I have an example that happened to me last week. That is, I was working in the heading structure of a document, and I thought it was clear, logical. I didn't skip hierarchical levels. When I shared that with a colleague that was a blind person using screen readers, she told me that it was good, but it was confusing for her. And I didn't have to add those that many levels for her to understand, and it was not a good experience. So she helped me fix that, and that would be something that I would miss if I didn't contact her. So what I'm talking about is that we really need to move on beyond those consultation and bring people with disabilities into the creative process. And to do that, we need to create a safe environment, very respectful for her, so they can feel empowered and be able to share their experiences with us. And also, I think it is important also to allocate funding, because that's time that they're spending with us, working with us, sharing their expertise, and we should fairly pay them to share that with us. And also, as I mentioned before, we will save money. And the last thing I want to talk, if I have time, is something that Wilco also mentioned, and it's training. 42% of the national employees in Spain for the government, they're facing citizens. Only 4%, 42% of those have training in accessibility. Only 10% of those that are related to digital content have training in web accessibility, and only 1.5% of them, the people of post online, they know how to post with accessibility. They had training to do that. So it is very important that we do onboarding with accessibility, and then we provide role-specific training, continuous training to those communication and procurement teams. So to finalize, just saying that the path for 2030 is clear. We have this foundation that is the what we're celebrating today, but it is a path that has to be built with shifting left, paved with co-creation, and also powered by a culture of competence in our own teams and among our partners. So that's all for today.
Thank you very much, Breixo. That's kind of not the easiest path that you have drawn up here for us, but it's very clear what we all need to do. So thank you for sharing that. And now we move to Hector, who is going to talk to us about, the speech is called From Code to Conversation, GenAI Tools for Accessible and Intelligent Web Experiences.
Hey, Susanna. I may have adapted my slides according to some feedback conversation we had a few weeks ago. But we will get into the Gen AI in the conversation. Hi, everyone. So I'm Hector. I essentially lead on our community customer engagement around the world for Microsoft. Essentially, our strategies in terms of how we have conversations with organizations about accessibility. And as I got prepared for this conversation, and we'll definitely get onto the Gen AI. But I was reflecting on kind of my 9 years at Microsoft and kind of some of our learning as we engage with customers of all industries and all sectors, very specifically public sector organizations around the world. And one of the things that I would just share straight away is that we increasingly understand that this is a community effort. Okay, as much as we were meeting amazing accessibility professionals in every single organization, what we recognize is that many organizations were not having active conversations with their own employees about disability, or their own citizens with their experiences around accessibility of the systems that they were expected to use. And then maybe the one that was missing most of all, if I'm totally honest with you, in terms of public sector organizations, is nobody was having any real conversation with their suppliers in a smart way, of which Microsoft was obviously one of them. How many organizations in the public sector were genuinely holding us responsible for the accessibility of the products that we were selling into them, and not just the products we were selling in, but the deployment of those products within their organization and the impact that would have on their own employees, was super interesting. And this is increasingly how we're driving our own momentum as an organization. We, as an accessibility team at Microsoft, have essentially about 6,000 products in scope for accessibility. But across the kind of so many of the tips that we've heard already, and things like the champs communities and the training and the general awareness, fundamentally the shift has been to sharing the responsibility across the whole organization and making people own their own stuff, and empowering people to own their own responsibilities on accessibility, from their websites to their SharePoints to their documents to their products, and then signposting back into learning and support, and then monitoring this information as an organization as we report on it. And then this conversation about who do you report to, who actually looks inside an organization at the right level about this accessibility conversation that we're all trying to have. If I can take the next slide, Susanna. So in terms of learnings, one of the really interesting things that I would say straight away is that very few public sector organizations that I've worked with are linking their disability hiring to their accessibility deliverables or their accessibility programs. If we look at the public sector as an employer of disabled people across the world, it's higher. So it's actually a very high proportion compared to most other industries in terms of people in public roles or public sector roles declaring as people with disabilities. And yet the ownership of accessibility was quite often kind of, siloed within an organization, within a tech department. And very few organizations in the public sector that we actually speak to about accessibility have any kind of reporting on it in terms of their numbers and what they report to their chief executive. And yet, as Microsoft, the CEO of Microsoft understands how accessible we are or not because we have a chief accessibility officer reporting in on the various data points that are interesting at that level. The other thing that we see is that organizations don't actually share their accessibility standard as much as they should, or have their own accessibility standard. They rather lean into the public standard that they have, whereas what we obviously do as Microsoft is we have built our own standard according to all of the different regulations to make sure that we're meeting the standards wherever we see fit. And when people build their own standard, they start to think about their own issues and their own deliverables as organizations, which takes us to the next point, which is this concept of influencing supply chain in a meaningful way. As much as when I've been speaking to organizations, like I'm actually with a public sector council in the UK today, people think about their own websites, but they don't think about the bin collection website being accessible. They're not promoting their standards and their expectations of digital accessibility further on to their supply chain to give that holistic, accessible experience. And I think as organizations, I think we've got a lot of work to get braver there in terms of understanding what we're putting out there and what the influence public sector organizations can obviously have. Training is definitely one of those topics that's already been mentioned, but this train everybody approach is interesting once you have reached the level of seniority in an organization to have the conversation. We know that when we train people on digital accessibility, what is disability, what tools do people with disabilities need, and how do you build for accessibility, that leads to more buy-in and more awareness of the tools. The event I've been at today, there were 60 people in the room. I asked them who understands how to use the accessibility checker in Office, and one hand went up in terms of their awareness that you could check a document for accessibility. The more we spread that knowledge out through organizations, the more we create an expectation of accessibility amongst a much greater set of stakeholders. And then the final point, as Susanna challenged me to kind of reflect on this topic, was governments and public sector organizations influence all industries. I would genuinely argue that the maybe not the banks, but I would definitely say the retail organizations, the transport sector, so many industries are looking for public sector leadership on the topic of accessibility as we start to see things like the European Accessibility Act come into play. They're kind of assuming that they can lean into public sector and understand what good looks like and how people have built for accessibility. And I genuinely think we've got so much more work to do there. If I could just take my last slide, Susanna, please. So call to action, and this is where GenAI, I think, is going to increasingly come into play. I loved watching Wilco's session earlier as I was waiting to join. This being nudged on accessibility, discovering it a lot more, seeing it more in the experiences, and democratizing testing and building for accessibility. You can definitely start to see that's becoming more apparent as we see some of these vibe coding tools come out. People are seeing more conversation around accessibility in what I'm seeing so far, particularly within our GitHub community. But 3 examples just to kind of maybe just sort of share in terms of what I think are kind of signs that this is going in the right way. The accessibility checker for documents is inline checking now. So you don't have that tax of checking for accessibility at the end. It's much more as you go along, you're being flagged about the fact that you've built something that is inaccessible or maybe has a design challenge associated with it. Before you export a document into a PDF, you get flagged if the accessibility checker has seen that there are accessibility mistakes in there. You get asked at that point, are you sure you want to export and lock in this accessibility? On the democratization, we're seeing, obviously, we put accessibility insights out both publicly, but also mainly driving it within our own organization. So as I said at the start, really make accessibility your responsibility. And then in terms of the UX piece, we're seeing things like the Figma accessibility plugins now that are more routinely available, just to kind of give people that flag and that nudge to be more accessible. Last comment, as we think more of that co-pilot from our perspective, as we see people looking at what modern accessibility looks like and how people are using technology moving forward, how we're going to democratize now genuinely for the first time, I think, the building of software. It is going to be the general public that are building things now, using these live coding tools and things. More than ever, I think we're going to need GenAI to be flagging kind of inaccessibility. And I look to DQ and the others and Site Improve in the room to sort of, you know, that I think it was a great point earlier about that is your industry. Yeah. But I think we as big tech need to be super supportive of the partner ecosystem and say, this is work that needs to be done. Here are the products that are going to do it, and make the progress that we all need to make. But back to you, Susanna, for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Hector, for sharing this, and sorry for not remembering that we changed the.
Sorry,
I don't know. Too many ideas at the same time.
I was probably doing too much sexy stuff on my previous stuff, Susanna, and you told me to tone it down.
Yes. Yeah. I need to take that down a bit. So we had a concrete question from the audience around for Christina in Site Improve. So my expertise is in UX and digital content transformation, and a big fan of Site Improve also. I've used the site checker tools in my class to teach students different ways to detect and inspect issues. What have been your wins and gained traction with public sector clients who are not driven by profit goals? I think that's an interesting twist on this.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So I primarily work with the U.S. public sector, so there may be minor differences here, but in U.S. public sector, at least in my experience, our customers there, especially using our tooling at Site Improve, things like that, are building accessibility programs, right? They are trying to operationalize this concept of digital accessibility across the agencies, from leadership all the way down, right? So we're definitely seeing, I guess, motivation from the leadership in public organizations to serve their people appropriately. They aren't necessarily motivated by money, and they aren't necessarily motivated through conversions, but they do want to be seen as an authority, right? Like the content that they produce has to be relevant, it has to be trustworthy, it has to be timely, and all of these things, and it has to be consumable for people, right? So that is really driving a lot of the work, I think, today in public sector that I'm seeing, at least.
Hector, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, to me, I think there's a lot of the people who interface with people with disabilities in society have not got an understanding of digital accessibility. So, you know, the stakeholders out there, you know, the citizens' advice, the social workers, the occupational therapists who are kind of, you know, out there looking at home automation or access to the house, but not looking at access to the websites and access. So I think our opportunity here, in terms of, when you, Christina, quite rightly, leaders are always thinking about services, you know, the externalities that we're delivering out there. What is the citizen experience for government services? But the practitioners who are doing the kind of the day job of public services, their knowledge of accessibility and assistive technology is so low. Yeah, so there's almost like no expectation for Mrs. Jones to be able to use her website, because how would she do that? We've got no idea. Yeah. Like, I always talk about Mrs. Jones. Sorry, it's a very British thing, but you understand what I'm saying. I think the missing link is between the chief exec, or the leadership is the missing link between what are we building, but actually what is it we're actually doing out there in society, I think is what I think.
So in my experience, you don't really, or at least in the Nordic countries, you don't need to argue that much for accessibility, because it's kind of, if you work in public sector with communication, you want everyone to get your message. So it's awareness and then putting the money where your mouth is and all of that. But you don't need to, you don't need to tell them why this is important. But I would like to ask Sandra, what's in Belgium? You are within the public sector body. So what is, you talked about driver and motivation for the people working on this, but I mean, what makes the management want to do this?
You really have to come and convince them, but it's not always easy, as you know. But showing them is one of the main arguments or the main way to get something. As I told, we train everyone from CEO to accountant, law services, and so on. So they saw how a blind user was using NVDA or JAWS, and that convinced them. And I think that's when they get the information and when they start to do something. Before that, it's only theoretical and you don't get anything. That's my experience.
Yeah. And Breixo in Spain, where you had horrible numbers, but I guess they reflect also the situation in other EU countries, unfortunately. I don't have the statistics, but very few people are trained. So how do you make anyone in the public sector do this if nobody knows what it is about? I mean, it seems like an impossible task.
Yeah, well, we have to address them and explain them what accessibility is in digital world, because people just tend to think about accessibility in the physical. So ramps and elevators and things like that for them is very hard to grasp what digital accessibility is. And because most of the people here, they don't tend to complain, mostly when you talk with them, because they don't have the time or the effort to complain about it. So they don't get the feedback from the public that something is not working properly. So for me, when you try to convince people about that, is try to talk to the politician and tell them that it's going to be beneficial for the citizens, and also going to be good publicity for the government.
Yeah. So naming and shaming is what we do in the Nordics. Instead, we don't tell them that it will be good. We just put a list out and nobody wants to be in the bottom, and that kind of makes them climb the ladder. So that works well in countries where we have a lot of transparency, and I know that's not the case in all parts of Europe. Unfortunately, I think that's a good stick. So what is the single most powerful success that you have seen? Could be in policy or legislation or technology or humans or whatever, but do you have any kind of success story to share? Something that really went well in an organization, a client of yours, or in your own organization? Something you would like to share? Hector, you always have positive stories.
Yeah, I mean, my first positive is buyer and seller conversations about accessibility is what we've been trying to drive. Very few Microsoft sellers are having an accessibility conversation, right? You got to wait to be asked. What we're trying to do is get people on the front foot on it. But the response we're getting when that level of engagement from, say, Microsoft or our partners are going in and talking about accessibility is super positive. It's like, tell us more. So I just like that's one I would just say. In terms of specific examples, it goes back to kind of what I was trying to get at a moment ago, which is the actual usage of people with disabilities of accessible technology, was where we went in and looked at the UK job service. So the UK employment centres, essentially people looking for jobs. And we trained 23,000 work coaches on 101 disability tech. Like, many of the pros on here would be like, oh, this is so simple. Like it's so obvious how you magnify. It's so obvious how you dictate on a computer. But the people working with disabilities every day were not aware of what even accessibility was. They didn't even know what an accessible document was. So then the thought of sending an accessible document to a client who's blind looking for a job was completely alien to them. We've now trained 32,000 work coaches at DWP. And what it's done is it's created, like, if you think of it as a kind of a machine or an ecosystem, more work coaches are having conversations about it. And there's more visibility for the accessibility professionals in the organization because the expectation is lifting. I think this linking it to the actual citizen deliverable is where I think I'd like to see more. And that's where I think the opportunity is.
Yeah.
And then the accessibility professionals get pulled through.
Yeah, or we are not needed because everyone else already has the competence. That's what I'm hoping for.
There's a lot of work to
today,
do.
But, yeah, we need to all be able to retire sometime. Sandra, do you have any success story or something powerful that has happened that you have seen in the public sector?
Oh, it's really simple. It was I think, last year, the enthusiasm of my blind colleague sitting just next to me and filling in alone an accessible form to participate in the end of the year party. I know it's really simple, but the years before we had to help her, and she was really happy with that. And that's the point of all of this, is to get autonomy, and that's the motivation and my success story.
Yeah, for people to see that, so that it's not just about, oh, I need to be able to pay taxes. It's also, I need to be able to go to a party. I think that is, for me, that kind of mindset is really important to also get culture and the nice things around. So I think it's a good example. Christina, do you have something to share?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the show us, right? I think the first time I ever saw somebody early in my career use a Braille display, it kind of changed my trajectory, professionally speaking. Decided to focus more on accessibility, and here we are. This is what happened. So I totally agree with that, and I definitely agree with this influencing the supply chain. I think you said, Hector, right? Like having regulation in place allows for public sector to push other software vendors to be more accessible, right? And I think we're going to see more and more of that throughout the globe, honestly. I think that's going to be vastly more important. I think our success story, or one that I've witnessed personally, is we had a public sector customer who had, I mean, hundreds of thousands of documents, hundreds of thousands of assets, right, across their system, that suddenly they were panicking about having to make accessible before a deadline. And my favorite document strategy, sorry, Hector, is delete them, right? Take them out, take them down, right? If they're not relevant anymore, take them down. And they actually reduced their documents by honestly like 65% or something like that. And suddenly the burden was manageable, right? And it made such an impression upwards from the people making the day-to-day work to the executives to see, look at this progress we have made. We didn't even know this stuff was out on our website. It's a cleanliness thing, it's a technical debt thing, but now suddenly, like, your public is less confused about the content that you're creating too, right? It has an actual user benefit as well. I think that was our biggest win in recent memory.
Mm-hmm. And Breixo, what do you have any Spanish examples?
Yeah, I have one actually. For Aguas de Málaga, like the water supply from Malaga. We work the accessibility on their website, and the mom of the procurement person that contact us and ask us to make their website accessible actually told his son, like, right now I see where you work and what you're doing, because before that it was not accessible. So they had like the calendar with all the things that the company was doing, like lifting here and fixing this and doing that, and all the diagram with all the people where the people worked, and because it was not accessible, she could not see that. But thanks of accessibility, she could actually access and see what his son was doing. Oh, he called me like, hey, my mom told me that now he can see what I'm doing, and and all this stuff, and it's really fantastic.
It's also a good story. Thank you for sharing that. So I feel a little bit like we are. There's a lot of talk about AI and so many other exciting things, but we are still kind of working backwards and a little bit doing the same things or similar things that we started doing when the Web Accessibility Directive was applicable 5 years ago. And we have seen today that there has been a lot of progress, and we have seen that from policymakers, from monitoring agencies, from public sector, and also from the end users. So we do see progress, which is really fantastic, even if I personally think it moves a little bit too slow. But where will we be in 5 years from now or 3 years from now? Or I mean, in the future, where are we? What are we looking at? We are getting even more legislation, more technical standards, more technology, more AI, and hopefully people are getting more engaged and possibly more trained. So when you look at the future, Breixo, what do you see? Are you happy and optimistic about us kind of solving all these issues in a couple of years, or what's your thoughts?
Well, yes, I am. And here in Spain, we're building a strategy that, together, not only professionals, but people for disabilities organizations trying to improve accessibility in the digital world, but also how public employees address people with disabilities. So, thanks to technology and thanks with more awareness and people getting more trained. So I think that hopefully we have a very bright future ahead, heading to that 2030 goal.
Well, that sounds good. And Sandra, in Belgium, you have been doing this for a long time and you're kind of still happy and motivated. That's very rewarding to see. But where do you think we are in a couple of years from now?
I don't know, but I have to admit that it can be very frustrating because it's true that sometimes you have the feeling that it goes very slowly. That's the other side of the of my presentation. But to be honest, if I look backwards, 5 years ago in my organization, we were nowhere. And now we have made this huge step. And so I have the feeling that within 5 years, it would be much better. Hopefully, thanks to, it was already said before, to the European Accessibility Act, I hope that the private sector will become increasingly demanding too. And together, I hope that we make accessibility a non-negotiable requirement. So I'm positive, even if sometimes it's hard.
Okay, starting negative and ending positive. That's very
Voilà.
good. Tina, you look like a happy person. So where do you think we will be in 5 years?
Yeah, 5 years. Let's see. I think I really do hope okay, let me back up. AI, right? We're talking about innovation. We're talking about things that are exciting, right? Things that AI is very good at is getting a lot of information into one easy to access place, right? I think we're going to be at a place where we no longer have to look up technical specs. I think we're at a place where we can easily digest legislation and regulation across the globe in one place, right? I think even from a business perspective, we can then start making better decisions to serve people and anticipate user needs through some of these toolings. And that's really the part that I hope drives forward, right? There's growing pains that we're all experiencing right now with all of this. But I do think there's a huge benefit in the future to using some of these data aggregator tools, right? These AI tools that start talking to each other to really better understand where we are, where we're going, what our users want, and to anticipate where those users are going to go, right? Because user technology is not static either. It's always going to change. So how is the screen reader going to function in 5 years? I think there's enhancements there that we'll have to also work with. And to avoid that constantly moving line, we have to use some of these smart tools, these AI tools to really assist our own knowledge growth and our own process.
Yeah. And who knows if there are screen readers around
right.
here. So I mean, that's
exactly
an impossible question, but just looking into the future somehow anyway. So Hector, what's your take on the future?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, where would we be in 5 years' time? Like, would I have imagined like where, how much has happened in that time in terms of the tools that people are using in the workplace and, just the Gen AI, Chat GPT moment. I wasn't predicting that. The impossible becoming possible in some ways, just in terms of the hacks. That's really what we've seen so far is people are hacking and like problem solving and working around the inaccessibility in completely new ways. My hope for 5 years' time, and I've put a link to our skills course in there. We basically pulled a lot of people with disabilities to talk about how they're using AI already and kind of how they're staying relevant in the job market. But my genuine wish is that more people with disabilities are activating accessibility conversations in society. And I think this concept of responsible AI being accessible AI, or responsible AI not having a negative impact on people with disabilities, is a political thing. And I think, what I really hope and what I hope for in 5 years' time is that the actual promotion of accessibility is coming from the obvious, much greater need of tech to work for people with disabilities. I would say over the last 20 years, it's not been obvious to people why tech has to work for people with disabilities because there's not enough of a voice out there. I feel that voice getting louder, out there. And I think it starts with skilling people with disabilities about increased expectations that things just should work as we go through this digital transformation. That's what I'm hoping for.
And that should also go for the older adults and people who are not savvy. And I mean, there's such a big group that you would think from a logical point of view that society, politicians, companies would have realized this already. So I'm still a little bit amazed that we need to try to tell them. I mean, it's why isn't it obvious? Nobody really explained that to me in a way that I can understand, but I don't know if you have the answer. But
no, I don't have it. Well, how long have we been talking about silver surfers? It feels like, yeah. I think it's more of the social justice of inaccessible services is not where it needs to be. That social justice conversation.
I agree, and we have had several comments on that also during today. That kind of policies, society, attitudes need to change, and so on. And I think we also touched upon it when we talk about training, not just training professionals, but really starting with this training and awareness really early on. So on. So it all kind of goes full circle. But I'm very happy to hear that you are all positive and looking forward to the years to come with good technology, motivation, and the policy part of things from the EU. At least maybe policy is now a driver in the EU more than in certain other places, but also that we together can do things with different stakeholders if we keep up the good work. And I was also encouraged by Hector's sense of that people take more responsibility across the whole kind of production chain, or you used another word, but that if that is true, then that is really that is really good, I think, because that is what we have been looking for. So thank you very much for sharing all your thoughts and experiences and knowledges and hopes for the future with us.